What is up, guys? Daniel Plotkin here, muscle scientist and of course muscle lover, and in this video I'm going to go over how sets are counted in research and how you should go about counting sets in the gym toward different muscle groups. In volume research, if the muscle is a prime mover in an exercise and the set is taken close to failure, so it's not a warm-up set, it's a regular working set, then it's simply counted as 1 for each of the major muscle groups involved. So it's a 0 to 1 scale. It's either counted or it's not, which means for a bench press, it would be 1 set for the tricep, 1 set for the anterior delt, and 1 set for the chest. So we can see how this may pose some issues, and the fact that it may pose some issues is not lost on researchers. When does a muscle start to be considered a prime mover? Are we ignoring some muscles that are prime movers because they are hard to measure? What if one exercise works the muscle better than another, even though it's a prime mover in both? What if one head or region of the muscle is worked better for a specific exercise? What about non-primary muscles, or muscles that work isometrically in the gym? So for example, forearms are used for gripping in a lot of exercise. How are those counted? An RDL definitely counts for glutes and hamstrings, but does it count for all the back muscles preventing spinal flexion, or that are preventing your scapula from moving and your arms from literally getting ripped out of their sockets? These questions are definitely interesting, but let's start with fully disentangling how sets are counted in research. In a study, if the goal is to see how sets affect muscle growth, then ideally everything else is standardized in the study. Exercises, proximity to failure, rest periods, and so on. So if a specific exercise gives a muscle a better stimulus, or increases its size differently across muscle heads or regions, this matters only to the extent that researchers should choose areas and regions of interest. But as long as you standardize the exercises and measurements, then the comparisons are valid. But of course, this may only apply to the actual context of the study, so the exercises and other things that were used, so looking at the exact protocol is a good idea. For example, you may cap out the hypertrophy response from one exercise faster than another, or with longer rest periods, and so on. But importantly, within the context of the study, we can make comparisons by simply assigning sets as 0 or 1. Since things are standardized, it wouldn't really matter if we used 1 or 5 or 0.7 or pi. So to make things easier, 0 to 1 is good enough. So why don't current volume studies directly help us solve for all muscles, smaller muscles, muscles acting isometrically, and so on? This one's easy. Many muscles haven't been measured in volume studies, so we don't know exactly what the dose-response relationship looks like. It would be very difficult and often very expensive to measure every muscle in every study. The only muscles measured to date in studies comparing volumes are quads, hamstrings, biceps, triceps, and one study with the upper traps. So the other portions of the trap, calves, chest, abs, delts, glutes, basically the whole back, and many other muscles didn't get any love from volume studies as of today. Does this mean we can say nothing about these muscles that haven't been measured? No, because while there can be differences, they are similar enough that we can draw tentative conclusions because we wouldn't expect muscles to behave very differently when it comes to optimal volume for growth. This principle is called generalizability, which will get a lot of mentions throughout the series. This, as I mentioned, is a tentative generalization, but we do have data from other studies not looking at the volume question in the many muscles that I mentioned. So the best guess isn't being made completely in the dark. Okay, so now we know that in research, it's either 0 to 1, not because it's the best way to go about doing things, but because there's no reason to do so any other way. And since exercises and many other things are standardized in those volume studies, it's mostly all good. But what about in the gym when considering how all of our muscles respond to the choices we make and the exercises that we use? Not just the 1 to 3 specific muscles being measured in a volume study. Well, the answer is, unfortunately, there is no straightforward answer. As you learn more, you could explicitly assign exercises and techniques different numbers. Exercises harder in a stretch position might be a 1.3. If your gym crush is around, everything is set to 1.5. If you follow her around the gym and half-ass every exercise, every set's going to be a 0, and stop doing that. Jokes aside, I personally wouldn't recommend assigning fractions to sets, because it would be annoying to track, and it would be assuredly inaccurate when thinking about the actual stimulus per set. For many of these topics, we don't know how much of a different stimulus an exercise or a specific technique would give you, and the context in which the exercises and techniques are being applied would change the stimulus. If you did assign numbers to a program, it would probably work just fine if you wanted to be a weirdo nerd. Or you can simply have a framework or heuristics around how you think about different muscles, exercises, proximity to failure, rest periods, and so on. Here's an example. I threw together some quick exercises for the legs, minus the calves, because I know you guys don't care about the calves. Alright, so you'll notice as I add sets, it's going to be 1 or 0 to a bunch of muscles, but I situated the exercises in specific ways due to some known or theoretical considerations. I paired the squat with the leg extension because the squat doesn't hit the rectus femoris well, and the leg extension does. I put the seated hamstring curl because it puts the hamstring in a lengthened position, and if I'm only going to do one exercise for a muscle in the day, I'll probably make it more lengthened biased because the evidence is mounting that making an exercise hard in the stretch position is better for growth. And there's even specific evidence in the seated versus lying hamstring curl. On the second leg day, I have an RDL, which hits the hamstring in a more lengthened position, and I pair it with an exercise that's less lengthened biased. The lying hamstring curl for potentially a slightly different stimulus and for some variety. This day is less quad focused, so to get more juice from the quads in less time, I have a sweet superset, which I can do without worrying about fatigue because it's the end of a session. It's a leg extension to sissy squat partial. There's some muscle length considerations with this choice, as well as stability and standardization considerations. Leg extensions are very loadable, easy to standardize, and stable, so getting some pre-fatigue from them and then jumping into sissy squat partials gives you a sweet pump at the end of the session. Even with all these considerations and likely differences in stimulus, some that I'm less and some that I'm more confident about, I still counted all these sets as 1 if the muscle is a prime mover. So this example was just to show that set number is just a ballpark starting point while layering on other considerations. I personally keep a set tally for most of the major muscle groups, while knowing that since I'm adding isolation exercises, some muscles such as the biceps and triceps are going to end up at a higher volume since they also count in rows and presses and so on. As you learn more about anatomy, proximity to failure, rest periods, intensity techniques, and experiment with yourself, you'll become better at making training decisions. In the next video, spoiler alert, I'm going to make a recommendation that says, for most context, 10 to 20 sets per major muscle group per week is a good starting point, and people who didn't watch this video are going to be confused. Why? Because it's actually confusing. I, like others, use this recommendation as a shorthand, but realize that without context, it's not very useful. So hopefully now it's less confusing. If the muscle is a prime mover in a given action, it counts as 1, and usually it's obvious that it's a prime mover. For now, the research we have measures specific prime movers with all else standardized. This is good for that purpose. However, in the gym, we consider different exercises and many muscle groups and training techniques, and we don't yet know how these interact with volume. So having a ballpark set number is great, but these sets don't exist in a vacuum. So the number will shift as you layer on other considerations. It really comes down to the fact that as you learn more, you can make sets fit together better for your desired goal. And like I've said before, it's not hard to get things right, especially mostly right. But if you want to get things more right, obviously keep watching these videos and subscribe to the channel. That's all you got to do. In the next video, we're going to talk about how many sets you should actually do. It'll be a big one. As always, share with friends and family, but not the ones that hate you. Peace! Peace!